If you look at the indictment of the Russians who were involved in this influence campaign, these very clever Russian operatives have been infiltrating social media in the United States in an effort to set people against each other and also to elect Donald Trump. But when you look at what they actually did, you will start to see that is a big exaggeration. That's the thesis.
Information warfare against the United States.
Whatever platform you look at, the amount of material that the Russians generated was just a tiny, tiny fraction of what was out there. According to the indictment, the Russians spent thousands of dollars on social media ads each month. Well, that's about 1/millionth of the ad revenue that Facebook alone receives each month. It's the same story if you look at YouTube. The Russians were responsible for producing 43 hours of political content, which may seem like a lot until you realize that 400 hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every minute. Most of them had low view counts. Less than 3% had more than 5,000 views. So clearly this did not amount to much in the context of advertising online and the context of online speech.
Information warfare against the United States.
Supposedly, these Russian trolls were very sophisticated about the American political system. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to manipulate American voters. But if you look at what they actually did, they look not so professional. A lot of these posts sound like they are written by people whose native language is not English. And you would expect sophisticated operatives to speak better English so they could pass themselves off as Americans. They created some very crude propaganda that they seemed to think would be effective. For example, there's an ad on Facebook that showed Jesus arm wrestling with Satan. Now you may say to yourself, that seems ridiculous, but perhaps people will fall for that. In fact, it generated very little interest, very few clicks, very few viewings.
Information warfare against the United States.
The indictment makes much of pro-Trump and anti-Clinton rallies that were instigated by the Russians, but it doesn't tell us how many people actually participated in these rallies or whether they came off at all. We know there's one example of a rally in Texas that was organized to oppose Shariah law, and according to the New York Times, it attracted a dozen people. There was a counter-protest that, according to the New York Times, was also organized by the Russians and attracted a much larger crowd, but that could be 2 dozen or 3 dozen people for all we know. We know that some people in the real world responded to the agitation for rallies, but we don't know whether this really amounted to a significant percentage of voters.
Information warfare against the United States.
Nor do we know whether any of this advertising, even the ads that got more attention than the one with Jesus arm wrestling Satan, whether they actually changed anybody's mind or energized them in any way or got them to behave in any way different from how they would have behaved otherwise. You know, pro-Trump people might turn out for a pro-Trump rally. Anti-Clinton people might turn out for an anti-Clinton rally, but the fact that they show up does not necessarily change the outcome of the election or make the United States a more acrimonious society, let alone sow chaos.
Information warfare against the United States.
And the reason that this sort of hysterical response is rather alarming is that at bottom we're talking about speech. If you look at the actual content of these ads and these tweets, it's not qualitatively different from all of the homegrown, all the homegrown crap you can routinely see online. This is essentially the same. I mean, it doesn't mean it's good, it doesn't mean it's substantive, doesn't even mean it's accurate. Some of the arguments might have held some water, some of them were completely ridiculous. That's true of American political discourse in general. It's simply the fact that these people were born in another country that somehow makes this more alarming than it would otherwise be. I mean, if there is a problem with American democracy in the sense that people are easily swayed by emotion, this is not a problem that the Russians created. This is a problem that is much broader than that. And to try to blame divisions within the American political culture on the Russians seems completely absurd to me. It's much easier to blame foreign invaders for these problems, but the truth is that if voters are making decisions for stupid reasons, that is not the Russians' fault.